Hello students, and welcome to your week 4 highlights video. So you read several chapters in Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think, Revisited this week, and I'm actually not going to squeeze them all into this video, so we will come back to that content in a future video. What you will see in this video, however, are a few slides and they have a lot of text on them. So I'm going to go through what I wrote in these slides, but I also encourage you to pause this video so you can read what I have on the screen and use it to basically quiz yourself to make sure that you got the content out of the chapters that is most relevant to what we're doing this semester. So to jump in, so let's talk about chapters 6 through 8. So chapter 6 asks you some really interesting questions about your habits as a web user. So the first question is, are you search dominant or are you link dominant? He gives some examples of people who will go to a new website and they'll automatically look for the search box. Are you one of those people, or are you pretty comfortable clicking around with various links on a website to find whatever it is that you're looking for? So what do you think of Krug's analogy to looking for a product in a store? He gives some examples of going shopping. He uses the example of Sears. In fact, in Albuquerque, our Sears is no more at Coronado Center. So think of any store. You could use Walmart in your imagination and think about going in there and you're looking for something. Let's say you're looking for trash compactor bags. How is it that you would go about finding those? Now think about that model of approach and how it would port over to using a website. Would you just sort of browse around looking for the thing that you want to purchase, or would you use a different approach to solving that problem? So since a website is a non-physical place, why is accessing a home place so important? And I would also ask you, is the home screen still really important? I know that when I go to Amazon, I always land on the home page. I'm not landing on a page deeper in, but if I'm looking for something at UNM, and I do a Google search, let's say for the requirements for the certificate for technical and professional communication, or for the minor in technical and professional communication, even though I built that page, I still often do a Google search for it, and Google takes me right to that page on the English department website rather than sending me to the front door of UNM's website, the homepage for UNM. Now, Amazon, I'm generally not putting into a Google search Amazon trash compactor bags and then being taken directly to some of those options. Usually I just go to Amazon. So I think it's an important question to consider why the homepage is so important and for which kind of websites it is important. It's not always important like I just explained in my example. So like street signs in a physical place, what are the conventions and locations in website navigation? So think about a website you go to a lot. Maybe it's Amazon.com, maybe it's the New York Times, maybe it's the Albuquerque Journal, or maybe it's UNM.edu. So think about one of these pages that you know really well, and think about where the street signs, quote unquote, are on that page. Where are the menus? Where is the search bar? Where is the About Us link? Are they generally in specific pages on all different kinds of websites? And so then he ends the chapter by giving an anecdote about something called the trunk test. He's really funny in his writing, and he always comes up with these memorable little quips. And this one is, if you, heaven forbid, were in the trunk of a car and were driven around and you were totally disoriented and you were let out of the trunk and you had to figure out where you were, how would you do that? Now, as applied to websites, what does he mean by the trunk test? So I want you to go back to the end of chapter 6 and look at this example and then try it yourself. It would be really important and useful for you to do that little test yourself. So moving on to chapter 7. So what are the 4 questions a website homepage should answer? And I would ask you now, moving over to thinking about mobile apps quickly, which we're going to come to on the next slide. Did your app's landing page from UI challenge number 1 answer these 4 questions that all homepages should answer? So go back to the beginning of your book's chapter 7 as well. Make sure that you're familiar with those questions. So what must pages deeper into a website also do to be sure that they orient the user? Now, if you go to unm.edu and you go, let's say, to the English department page as compared to the homepage of the university, are there certain things that both of those pages have that inform you as a user that they're part of a larger conglomeration of information? They're all part of UNM, this larger entity. What do they do to make you know that they are part of the same thing? And do your navigational skills that you used on the homepage also help you to navigate the subpages that relate to the English department components? Next, what does Krug mean by saving the homepage from promotional overload? So try to see if you can find that quote in chapter 7 and see if you understand what that means. Okay, moving on to chapter 8. Is there such a thing as an average user? We always use that phrase. The average user should be able to do A, B, and C. Now think about what that actually means and whether Krug thinks that that's a myth anyway. And then what does Krug mean by religious debates, and how does testing help to resolve these? He has all kinds of fun illustrations in his book, and he has a really good series of cartoons that illustrate the different stakeholders in a design process or in the build of a website, for example, in an organization, and what the different stakeholders hold as religion, effectively, things that they're really passionate about. He uses some menu approaches to illustrate what religious debates could mean in a web build scenario. And I've included here my landing page for my personal academic website. And some folks coming to my website, user testing my website, might have some religious beliefs about certain things, like a navigation menu should always be in a certain place. And they might say, Dr. Newmark's website violates the principle of where a navigation menu should be. It might also have, someone might also have concerns about how much information a user is supposed to be bombarded with about a certain person or technology when they go to a landing page, and they might think that mine does too much. They might look at various different university professors' personal websites and see whether they systematically have a certain set of navigational approaches and see whether mine abides by those or doesn't. You could also use my web page to perform the trunk test. So I want to bring that back up before we move on. Okay, chapter 9. So often usability testing gets done in a too little, too late, and for all the wrong reasons situation. What does that mean? He uses that adage, and I want you to think about that. So if you take that sentence apart, you can probably come to its meaning pretty quickly. So what is the difference between a focus group and a usability test? There's a really important distinction between these things. We're talking about usability testing in this class, but focus groups are viable options in some industries as well, but maybe not when you're trying to get to the pain points in a mobile app or product documentation or form design or website design. Usability tests are appropriate for that. So now I want to ask you, looking ahead to the second half of the semester, for class like this, say, could you come up with a regular schedule like Tuesday, Thursday for 2 weeks to have some folks test something? So you're going to have them test, let's say, 4 times over 2 weeks, once on Tuesday, Thursday, and the next week, Tuesday, Thursday. What would the benefit of that be, according to Krug? Now, would this approach, say testing 4 times with the same group of users in a condensed period of time, 2 weeks, would that only be for working with developers in an agile sense who were actively making changes to, let's say, the documentation for building a dresser, or out of a flat pack box, or building an app, let's say a navigation app or a traffic app? Would that kind of agile method of including user testing as something is in development be the only way that would work? Or could you have some benefit by testing people 4 times over 2 weeks for something that was already done? That's a really interesting question to think about. And I think if you think about it, you'll come to a pretty conclusive answer on it. Okay, so my last bullet point on chapter 9 is this. What Krug offers in this chapter is super useful to you. And you might find in the second half of the course that you're going to use his templates directly. So keep them in mind. Having a templated approach, since you're brand new to user testing, could be something you really rely on. So don't be shy about going back and using some of the things that he links to and some of the examples that he gives when it comes time for you and your group mates to come up with your own usability test. Okay, so chapter 10. What are some of the challenges for testing for usability on a mobile device rather than on a desktop website? Since he published this new revisited version of this book, I think this is his third edition of this book, things have changed even since then, and we are in fact using things on the go on our smartphones even much more. So what is a mobile site's biggest limitation? And I use that phrase knowingly regarding any of its pages or any of its screens, but mostly for the landing page. What is the biggest limitation? And he's pretty explicit about this. So for usability testing mobile apps, why does Krug recommend recording with a camera pointed at the user using the app rather than a screen recording of their use? What would a screen recording leave out that would be really important for a developer to know about? So think about that, pause the video, go back and look in chapter 10 and see if you can figure out the answer to that question. And he actually shows you in that chapter something that he came up with that sort of solves this problem and gets at the most nuanced understanding of how a user would use an app on a phone. So the last thing I want to tell you about today is chapter 11. We're going to think about the big concept of goodwill. He covers it throughout the chapter. And what does this mean in the context of user-friendliness or not of websites? And again, the graphics in this chapter are really on point and help make his message unmistakable. So go back and look in chapter 11 on the topic of goodwill and try to have certain concepts stick with you as a result of reading his text and looking at the illustrations and thinking about your own life when you've had bad will emerge as a result of interacting with a frustrating website or mobile app. So that is all I'm going to squeeze into this video for today. There's a lot of information. I will cover chapters 12 and 13 in another video, and we are going to end this video there for today, and I hope you've enjoyed it.